Mamdani, it's not official quite yet because there are votes that still need to be counted, but it appears that he's going to be the Democratic nominee, and his platform is concerning to many Republicans, calling for free buses, free childcare, city-owned grocery stores, all paid for by taxing wealthy New Yorkers and raising the corporate tax rate. Mamdani overcame accusations, and he still is being...
Well, I guess a lot more businesses are going to be leaving New York for probably the great state of Florida. I hate to say it, but I spent 16 years growing up in Florida, and I would much prefer Florida over New York any day. I get nice warm water at the beaches, beautiful sunny beaches, mind you, and yeah, a little bit of heat and humidity, but it ain't as blistering as the weather in Manhattan or just New York broadly. But we got to talk about this Democratic primary, because this to me is a broad symptom for somebody with these policies to win a Democratic primary. Mind you, this was shared by Gays for Trump 24. I just noticed that. Anyway, mind you that this is somebody who's winning a Democratic primary. To me, this is a sign of the failure of the Democratic Party to have any form of leadership whatsoever. When you look at people like Gavin Newsom, who in his own podcast is asked by Charlie Kirk point blank, do you support banning men, biological men, in women's sports? And Gavin Newsom can't even give you a straight answer because he's got to, hand gesture his way around. Well, I'm actually a fan of fairness. Oh, and by the way, I have 2 sons and daughters, and I've got 4 children. And have we talked about fairness yet? This is what people hate. People are sick and tired of lunatic politicians that can't give you a blunt answer. Who cares if you're wrong later? Just be honest and tell us what you're thinking so we can evaluate if we trust you or not. It's very simple, but no human is perfect. But politicians just suck, and this is why you're in a position of a leaderless Democratic Party, and then you get a loon like this who wins the Democratic nomination in their primary. So this person is actually now going to be going up against this guy who wears a red beret and was almost killed by John Gotti. Yeah, more on that in a bit. But apparently he was sitting in the back of a taxi and there was an assassin in the front of the car, turned around and shot him in the ding dong. And apparently this Curtis guy jumped out of the car and got away, and Gotti got charged, and it's just a big mess. Like, this Curtis guy, he's like OG New York. When you get targeted by John Gotti, you're like OG New York. But what's not OG New York is this guy, which is Mamdani, who in 2020, in fairness, 2020, this was right before COVID. Everybody was going like woke crazy at the beginning of 2020 and 2019. So it's entirely possible that some of these policies have changed. Oh wait, he has a website where he actually just gives you his current policies, so we could just look at some of these. He literally calls himself a democratic socialist, born in Uganda, who, will participate in or support hunger strikes for taxi drivers, to get debt relief for taxi drivers, winning over $100 million in the state budget for increased subway service, a successful fare-free bus pilot, because buses, I guess, are very expensive. And he'll use every tool available to bring down rent, create world-class public transit, and make it easier to raise a family. These are his pitches. The first pitch is freeze the rent. A majority of New Yorkers are tenants, and more than 2 million of them live in rent-stabilized apartments. One of the things that most people don't recognize, and it's okay because really unless you're into economics and you study this, it's understandable not to be aware of this, but here's how rent control works, just a brief bottom line. The people who are currently in a rental do benefit with rent control. So it is true that rent control benefits people who are currently in a home. However, in the long term, as with most things in politics, when you create some kind of price ceiling, you create long-term distortions. And so the more you implement rent controls the more popular you might look in the short term, but in the long run, what you actually do is you disincentivize the construction of newer, better quality products or properties and more of them. Instead, you essentially force the construction of lower quality, lower income properties, and you end up putting people potentially where they just can't afford to live in the first place. So if you can't afford to live somewhere, typically the idea is, okay, well, let's move somewhere where we can afford to live. But that doesn't mean people want to be displaced from their homes or their families or otherwise, and that's why rent control is so popular. So when the economy gets to a point where it's squeezing people out with lower incomes, there's a frustration that rent should be kept low. Again, it works in the short term, but only for the very short term. In the long term, you end up with fewer homes. And when you end up with fewer homes available, guess what happens? You end up with more unaffordability in markets, and you end up with shortages. So you end up with rental shortages and then unaffordable rents in the first place. So it's kind of like rent control just exacerbates the problem. The better way generally to reduce home prices is by increasing supply, by streamlining your building and safety standards and actually getting the government in a streamlined manner, keeping the government involved in a streamlined manner, but getting most of the bureaucratic red tape out of real estate. So that way you still have health and safety inspections and you can limit the potential risks of people building without regulation, but you don't make it so arduous to go through years and years of planning processes where different opinions can change different building plans on different street blocks at the whim of a local city council member or whatever. This is why it's so frustrating to build in areas like New York. It's very challenging. And some of these programs, like freezing the rent, are just going to exacerbate these issues in the long term. So from an economic point of view, this is a terrible idea. From a populist point of view, very, very common. Eric Adams has taken every opportunity to squeeze tenants with hand-picking, appointments, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so he slams Eric Adams. Something to keep in mind is Eric Adams was basically going to be a felon for taking political contributions, not properly disclosing them, and he was indicted. He was investigated by the FBI. He was a Democrat. Then he cozied up to Donald Trump, who basically ordered the investigations against Eric Adams dropped, and all of a sudden, Eric Adams is running as a Democrat. Now, this potentially led to Eric Adams, Mamdani's rise in the Democratic primary, because if you think about it, you have Eric Adams as an independent, so he's not part of the primary. So then it's either Cuomo or this guy, this freeze the rent guy. Well, do you want the slimeball that's Cuomo, whose reputation has basically been trashed, or do you want this socialist guy who says he's going to freeze your rent? Keep in mind, this is not an actual election yet. The election is November 4th, 2025 for the mayor, and Eric Adams is going to be running against Mamdani, as well as, again, this Curtis guy. So Curtis, he walks around with this beret all the time, this sort of red beret, because of his sort of anti-crime and like helping the homeless or whatever organization that he helped found. He founded the Guardian Angels back in the 70s, apparently, which may have contributed to him almost being murdered by the Gotti crime family. But, this picture looks like it's straight out of The Sopranos, okay? But anyway, this is not a foregone conclusion here that New York is about to become socialist. You're still going to have an election versus Adams, if people want to choose him, other independents, and then, of course, this guy, Curtis Sliwa, whatever. Here's the polling, how it shook up. Mamdani got 43% of the vote. Cuomo got 36% of the vote. Surprisingly, a lot of the higher income individuals ended up voting for Mamdani in this particular Democratic primary. So that would be of the Democrats, especially in parts of Brooklyn, along the edge, the coastal areas here, into Queens a little bit as well. And you can see the more conservative sides recoiled against the idea of government-run grocery stores, free buses, or frankly, initiatives like no-cost childcare or city-owned grocery stores. Now, again, while these things sound great, getting the government involved into low-profit businesses is usually very, very expensive and not very good. First of all, look at Kroger. This is Kroger's annual report. Kroger had sales of $147 billion, which makes them sound really rich, but they had a net income of just 1.8% of that, and they have to get through the ups and downs of economic cycles as well. So if you have recessions, you could really get taken out here. These are grocery stores operating at a 1.8% margin. This is a terrible business to be in. So this idea that Zorhan wants to run city-owned grocery stores to control food prices is insane. You'd be better off giving people more food stamp money than trying to actually run the businesses yourself, because once you start paying people prevailing wages to stand at a grocery store checkout line, it's gonna be a disaster. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for cracking down on crappy landlords because I actually think most landlords suck. But raising taxes is just gonna end up pushing out a lot of people from New York. Remind you, you already have some of the most extreme tax rates in New York. You have a city tax, the state tax, and the federal tax. So when you combine all of this, boy, it is a tough case to argue for more taxes in New York. And some of these plans that he comes up with seem to not only incentivize sort of crime, like ending cash bail, which we've tried this. We tried this in San Francisco. We tried legalized drug injection sites. We've tried this sort of stuff in Portland, Oregon. It was a giant failure. We tried defund the police. It was all a failure. This person really needs to learn from the failures of other countries, or sorry, other states. And I'm really hopeful that New York doesn't elect somebody like this, because frankly, it's just sad for the Democratic Party. It just goes to show that Democrats really can't get it together, and that it's a leaderless party right now. Very sad. Anyway, I gotta go. That's all I got. We'll see you in the next one. Goodbye and good luck.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.